Hello, this presentation is intended for students taking Anatomy and Physiology 2 with Gina Piscatelli at Madison Area Technical College. Please refer to your syllabus for the assigned readings and study questions that are associated with the topic, Specialized Blood Vessel Circuits. Before I begin describing the specialized circuits, I will first review systemic circulation so that we can identify how each specialization is different from normal. The specialized circuits that I will discuss include the pulmonary circuit, the coronary circulation, which contains anastomoses, two portal systems, one of which you learned in Anatomy and Physiology 1, the hypophyseal portal system, and a new one associated with the liver called the hepatic portal system. And finally, I will discuss ways in which blood circulation in the fetus differs from circulatory routes in adults and after birth. Recall that in the systemic circuit, arteries carry oxygen-rich blood away from the heart to organs, such as the renal artery shown in this picture. Systemic arteries are depicted as red to denote oxygenated levels, or oxygenated blood. Veins, on the other hand, carry oxygen-poor blood back to the heart from organs, such as the renal vein shown in this picture. Systemic veins are depicted as blue to denote blood that has a low level of oxygen. So with our review of normal circulation systemic circuits done, let's look at our first specialized circuit, the pulmonary circuit. You're somewhat familiar with this since we've already talked about blood flow through the heart. It is considered a specialized circuit because the pulmonary artery carries oxygen-poor blood, whereas the pulmonary vein carries oxygen-rich blood. This is the exact opposite of the systemic arteries and veins. So the nomenclature or designation of an artery versus a vein is based on which way blood is traveling with respect to the heart, not on whether the blood is oxygenated or deoxygenated. So in the pulmonary circuit, vessels carrying blood to the lungs are still arteries, even though the blood is oxygen poor. And vessels carrying blood away from the lungs back to the heart are still veins, but the blood is oxygen rich. The coronary circulation, that is, blood vessels that supply the heart, is considered specialized due to the fact that it has many collateral routes by which blood may reach a portion of the myocardium. This reflects the need that cardiac tissue has for oxygen in order to produce ATP, which of course is important for maintaining heart function to sustain life. The coronary circuit is actually a subdivision of the systemic circulation, making up 5% of circulating blood. Like the rest of the vessels in the systemic circuit, arteries carry oxygen-rich blood and veins carry oxygen-poor blood. Blood perfuses the myocardium by traveling from the aorta to coronary arteries, which branch off the aorta. Blood returns to the heart in coronary veins, which all merge into a large vessel called the coronary sinus, which empties into the right atrium. In this way, the coronary sinus returns deoxygenated blood to the right atrium, just like the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava do. This slide examines the anatomy of the coronary circuit. Look at the picture on the right first. Here are shown the two important coronary arteries that branch off the aorta anteriorly, the right coronary artery and the left coronary artery. Now look at the picture on the left. Here you can see the coronary sinus, which receives blood from all coronary veins. As I mentioned, the reason the coronary circulation is considered specialized is that it has an extensive arterial anastomoses that ensure oxygen is delivered to all parts of the heart. An anastomosis is a connection between any two tubes, but in this case, two blood vessels. These anastomoses provide collateral circulation, or another route, by which blood may reach heart tissue if another vessel is obstructed. Look at the picture on the lower left, look at the lower picture on the right, and notice that one arterial vessel is obstructed. Because there are several alternate routes that blood can still travel to the same region of the heart tissue will not die. When blood flow is insufficient to the heart or any other body tissue, the term ischemia is used. That is, ischemia is a condition of insufficient blood flow. The result of ischemia is oxygen deprivation or deficiency. Without oxygen, tissue death occurs. The term for tissue death is necrosis. You may have heard of the term myocardial infarction, sometimes abbreviated MI for short. This is an area of tissue death or necrosis called an infarct. So an infarct is defined as any area of necrosis in an organ. A myocardial infarction may be felt by a patient as chest pain, otherwise known as angina pectoris. The pain is thought to be due to the inability of muscle to make ATP, which is needed for muscle relaxation, as well as may be due to the buildup of lactic acid. The third type of specialized blood circuits is called a portal system. We will look at two different locations of portal systems within the body. Portal systems, like the vessels in the coronary circulation, are also part of systemic circulation. But portal systems differ from regular systemic routes because the blood will travel from the heart through two capillary beds before returning back to the heart. The vessel that connects the two capillary beds is called a portal vein. The function of a portal system is to provide two separate locations, that is, two capillary beds, for diffusion, exchange of materials to occur between the blood and body tissues. The first portal system is the hypophyseal portal system. You've already been introduced to it in A&P 1. It is associated with the hypothalamus, infundibulum, and the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland, not the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland. In this blood vessel circuit, oxygenated blood travels in the superior hypophyseal artery to the infundibulum. The diagram shows the superior hypophyseal artery and circles the primary capillary bed within the infundibulum. So here, the first primary capillary bed is located and is the site where hypothalamic hormones can enter the bloodstream. And of course, some oxygen can diffuse out of the blood across capillary walls. The capillaries of the primary capillary bed merge into larger vessels called portal veins, also labeled on the diagram. These portal veins carry blood to another capillary bed called the secondary capillary bed. Within this one, hypothalamic hormones diffuse out of the blood. and anterior pituitary hormones diffuse into the blood. When blood leaves the secondary capillary bed, it returns to the heart through veins carrying deoxygenated blood. Note that the hormones in the blood that leaves the secondary capillary bed will have to travel to the heart, through the heart, and out systemic arterial vessels to reach the intended target organs, tissues, or cells. Another portal system is the hepatic portal system. This may be new to you. In this specialized circuit, again, blood leaving the heart will travel through two capillary beds before returning to the heart. In this case, oxygenated blood travels within the mesenteric arteries going to the intestine and into capillary beds that surround the intestines. These capillary beds are the first site of diffusion, and it's where ingested and absorbed nutrients diffuse from the intestine into the blood. The capillaries then merge into a portal vein called the hepatic portal vein, which carries the nutrient-rich blood directly to the liver. Within the liver, another capillary bed provides the second site for diffusion. Here, the liver can take up any of those essential nutrients from the blood, and it will need some to make clotting factors and enzymes to store glycogen, as well as other substrates to perform many other metabolic reactions. From the capillary beds in the liver, blood travels in the hepatic vein, which merges into the inferior vena cava, from which it returns to the heart. This diagram is a little bit more anatomically correct, and it shows the actual hepatic portal vein as well as the two capillary beds in more detail. Notice that step 1 says that the products of digestion are absorbed into the capillaries in this first capillary bed. Then the nutrients travel within blood that's contained in the portal vein to the second capillary bed within the liver. Here, digested food molecules reach the liver, and the liver can monitor blood contents. Eventually, the blood will be carried back into the normal circulatory system through hepatic veins. The last topic in this presentation on specialized blood vessel circuits concerns the specializations found in the fetus, or the fetal circulatory system. One specialization involves the vessels within the umbilical cord that connects the developing fetus to the placenta. The other involves shunts within the body of the fetus. These shunts allow blood to bypass certain capillary beds. We will see that specialized vessels in the umbilical cord differ from systemic vessels in much the same way that pulmonary vessels do. That is, the umbilical artery carries oxygen-poor blood, whereas the umbilical vein carries oxygen-rich blood. And in the fetal circulatory system, we will see that there are structures which allow blood to bypass the lungs and the liver, since they are not fully developed or functioning. First, let's look at the umbilical vessels. As a fetus develops, its oxygenated blood comes from the mother. Mom's heart pumps oxygen-rich blood out the aorta, which branches into uterine arteries, labeled number 1 on this diagram. The uterine artery supplies the placenta with nutrient-rich oxygenated blood. From the placenta, which is labeled number 2, oxygen-rich blood is carried to the fetus in the umbilical vein, labeled number 3. This umbilical vein is shown in the diagram as a red vessel because it still carries oxygenated blood. The umbilical vein then merges with the fetus's inferior vena cava, which is carrying deoxygenated blood from the fetus tissues back to the heart. The inferior vena cava is labeled number 4 in the diagram. In this way, some oxygenated blood is delivered to the fetus's heart so that it can be pumped throughout the systemic circulation of the fetus. When blood is pumped out the fetus's aorta and arteries, it releases oxygen to surrounding tissues in the fetus's body. By the time blood reaches the inferior aorta, it is actually relatively deoxygenated. Branches off the inferior aorta carry this deoxygenated blood back to the placenta within umbilical arteries, which is labeled number 7 on this diagram. It's kind of hard to keep the umbilical artery and umbilical vein straight. To remember the difference, remember that the vessels are named in relation to the heart of the fetus. So a vein will be carrying blood to the heart of the fetus, and the umbilical artery will be carrying blood away from the heart of the fetus. You may have noticed that the fetal aorta is colored pink rather than red. It is losing oxygen, that's part of it, but it's also pink because oxygenated blood from the placenta is mixed with the deoxygenated blood that also returns to the heart from the body of the fetus. And that brings us to the topic of shunts. The fetal circulatory system contains these unique structures or short vessels called shunts. They allow blood to travel from one area to another, sometimes in order to bypass a capillary bed, and in one case to bypass a certain circuit entirely. For example, the pulmonary circuit, which is not needed in the fetus because the lungs are not functioning. There are 3 shunts in fetal circulation. One occurs in the liver and is called the ductus venosus. 2 occurs in the heart to bypass the pulmonary circuit and is called the foramen ovale. And the 3rd occurs between the pulmonary artery and the aorta of the fetus and is called the ductus arteriosus. Bypassing the pulmonary circuit and the fetal liver is important because neither the fetal lungs nor the fetal liver are completely developed or functional yet. The way the ductus venosus works is shown in this diagram. Number 1 labels the umbilical vein, which is carrying oxygen-rich blood. Number 2 labels some branches of this vein that form capillary beds within the liver. Blood flows into these capillary beds to allow liver cells to receive oxygen and nutrient-rich blood for its further development. But number 3 labels the larger ductus venosus, into which most of the umbilical vein's blood will flow. So most blood flows into the ductus venosus and then enters the inferior vena cava, which is labeled number 4, to return or to go to the fetal heart. Notice here that the inferior vena cava is carrying oxygen-rich blood from the ductus venosus, as well as some oxygen-poor blood from the fetal liver. That is why the inferior vena cava has blood colored purple in the diagram, to represent a mixture of oxygenated or red blood and deoxygenated blood. There are 2 further shunts that help blood bypass the lungs. These are the foramen ovale and the ductus arteriosus. The foramen ovale is really a hole, but it carries blood from the right atrium directly into the left atrium so that it doesn't enter the right ventricle. In this way, the right ventricle cannot pump blood into the pulmonary artery. Instead, blood arriving in the heart's right atrium will pass directly over into the left atrium to allow oxygenated blood to enter the left ventricle quickly so that it can be pumped out to the body of the fetus. Even though this foramen ovale supplies an alternate route, some blood does pass from the right atrium into the right ventricle when the atria contract. However, this other shunt, the ductus arteriosus, will take care of this. The ductus arteriosus is a very short vessel that connects the pulmonary artery with the aorta. So, in this way, any oxygenated blood that enters that right ventricle will be pumped towards the lungs, but it bypasses the non-functioning lungs and instead enters the systemic circulation quickly. This diagram reviews the path that blood travels through the fetal heart. First, notice that oxygenated blood and deoxygenated blood reach the right atrium. In the primary route, most blood travels through the foramen ovale to the left atrium. From the left atrium, blood moves to the left ventricle, which pumps blood out the aorta. But some blood follows the secondary route. It will travel from the right atrium into the right ventricle, and when the ventricles contract, this small volume of blood enters the pulmonary artery. But it will bypass the lungs by entering the ductus arteriosus, which leads to the aorta. That ends the new information. Some review questions are available here for you to check your understanding of specialized blood vessel circuits, and answers are available on the next slide. Thank you.